You think ground beef was just for meatloaf and burgers? Think again. For seniors cooking alone, a single pound could stretch into 5 or 6 different meals, each one hearty, satisfying, and made with love in a quiet kitchen. Let's dig into 30 cheap vintage ground beef recipes no one makes anymore. Hamburger gravy over rice was the weeknight lifesaver that kept seniors fed when energy and grocery budgets ran low. A half pound of ground beef was browned in a cast iron skillet, then sprinkled with flour and stirred until it formed a thick paste. Milk or water was added slowly, stirred constantly until the mixture transformed into rich, creamy gravy seasoned with salt, pepper, and a dash of Worcestershire sauce. The gravy was ladled generously over leftover rice, creating a meal that was filling and deeply satisfying. For seniors living alone in the 1950s and 1960s, this dish represented security, knowing that a little meat and pantry staples could produce something substantial. The recipe required no fancy ingredients, no complicated techniques, just patience at the stove. Children who visited their grandparents often remembered this dish served in heavy ceramic bowls, the gravy pooling around the rice, steam rising in quiet kitchens where love was measured in simple meals. Poor man's stroganoff brought a touch of elegance to modest kitchens without the expensive cuts of beef that traditional recipes demanded. Ground beef was browned with onions until fragrant, then combined with cream of mushroom soup straight from the can, a convenience that made this dish accessible to seniors who found elaborate cooking exhausting. Sour cream was stirred in at the end, creating a tangy richness that elevated the humble ingredients. The mixture was served over egg noodles cooked soft, the creamy sauce clinging to every strand. For seniors in the 1960s and 1970s, this recipe proved that budget cooking didn't mean sacrificing flavor or dignity. A single pound of ground beef could provide leftovers for several dinners when cooking for one. The dish appeared at potlucks and church suppers, where widows and widowers shared their versions, comparing notes on whether to add paprika or mushroom pieces. It was comfort food that carried memories of better times. Porcupine meatballs earned their peculiar name from the rice that poked out like quills after cooking, a visual trick that delighted children and reminded seniors of simpler times. Ground beef was mixed with uncooked rice, chopped onion, salt, and pepper, then shaped into balls and nestled into baking dishes. Tomato soup diluted with water was poured over the top, and the whole thing baked slowly until the rice absorbed the liquid and the meatballs turned tender. The rice expanded during cooking, creating that signature prickly appearance while stretching a half pound of meat into a full meal. For seniors cooking alone, this dish was practical magic. One pot, minimal cleanup, and enough food for several days of reheating. The tomato sauce gave everything a tangy sweetness, while the rice provided bulk that made the dish genuinely filling. This recipe survived in church cookbooks passed between neighbors who understood that ingenuity and economy made the best meals. Spanish rice with beef brought color and warmth to tables during decades when exotic flavors meant anything beyond salt and pepper. Ground beef was browned with onions and green peppers until the vegetables softened. Then rice was added along with canned tomatoes, water, and seasonings like chili powder and cumin. The mixture simmered covered until the rice absorbed all the liquid, turning fluffy and fragrant with each grain tinted orange from the tomatoes. For seniors living alone, this one skillet meal meant dinner and tomorrow's lunch from a single cooking session. The recipe was forgiving, a little more water if the rice seemed dry, a little longer cooking if needed. The dish appeared in countless community cookbooks throughout the South and Southwest, where frugal cooks understood that ground beef stretched furthest when surrounded by vegetables and grains. Each forkful delivered protein, vegetables, and starch in perfect balance, a complete meal that cost pennies per serving. Hamburger soup was the answer to cold evenings when seniors needed something warm and nourishing without standing at the stove for hours. Ground beef was browned with onions and celery, then covered with water or broth and combined with whatever vegetables were available: canned tomatoes, diced potatoes, carrots, green beans, corn. The soup simmered until everything melded together, the beef releasing its flavor into the broth while the vegetables softened. Seasonings were simple: salt, pepper, bay leaf, perhaps a pinch of thyme if the pantry allowed. For seniors, this soup represented the ultimate in practical cooking. A single pot that produced meals for an entire week, reheating even better than it tasted fresh. The recipe adapted to whatever needed using up, making it perfect for stretching resources and avoiding waste. Churches and senior centers often served versions of this soup at gatherings, knowing its warmth could comfort grieving widows and lonely elders alike. Every spoonful carried the essence of home cooking. Cheeseburger pie turned the familiar flavors of a beloved sandwich into something that could be sliced and served from a baking dish. Ground beef was browned with onions, seasoned simply, then spread into the bottom of a pie plate. A batter made from biscuit mix, eggs, and milk was poured over the top, and cheese was sprinkled generously before baking until golden and puffed. The result was a meal where the meat formed a savory base beneath a bread-like crust that absorbed all the delicious juices. For seniors cooking alone in the 1970s and 1980s, this dish offered the satisfaction of a cheeseburger without the fuss of grilling. Leftovers reheated beautifully, the cheese melting again into stringy perfection with each warming. The recipe spread through women's magazines and church cookbooks, praised for its simplicity and ability to please even picky grandchildren during weekend visits. One pie fed 4 easily or stretched across several days of solo meals. American goulash bore little resemblance to its Hungarian namesake, but generations of American cooks loved it anyway for its hearty simplicity. Ground beef was browned with onions and garlic, then combined with elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, and tomato sauce in one large pot. The pasta cooked directly in the liquid, absorbing all the meaty tomato flavor, while the sauce thickened around it. Seasonings varied by household. Some added Italian herbs, others preferred chili powder. Still others kept it simple with just salt and pepper. For seniors living alone, this dish was a revelation in efficiency. 1 pot, 1 hour, and enough food to last most of the week. The recipe appeared under different names in different regions: Slumgullion, Hodgepodge, Johnny Marzetti, but the principle remained consistent. Modest ingredients transformed through slow simmering into something greater than their parts. The dish was democratic food, equally welcome at church suppers and quiet dinners for one. Hamburger steak with onion gravy elevated a simple beef patty into a proper dinner worthy of the dining table. Ground beef was shaped into thick oval patties, seasoned generously, then pan-fried in a cast-iron skillet until browned on both sides but still juicy inside. The patties were removed while sliced onions were cooked in the remaining fat until golden and soft, then flour was sprinkled over to create the base for gravy. Broth or water transformed the mixture into rich brown gravy that was poured over the patties and simmered until everything melded together. For seniors who remembered when eating out meant white tablecloths and proper service, this dish brought restaurant dignity to the home kitchen. The gravy stretched a small amount of meat into a filling meal, especially when served alongside mashed potatoes that soaked up every drop. This recipe survived because it made ordinary ground beef feel like a special occasion. Texas hash combined the bold flavors of the Southwest with the practical economy that Depression-era cooks passed down through generations. Ground beef was browned with plenty of onions and green peppers. Then rice was added along with canned tomatoes and chili powder, enough to give heat without overwhelming. The mixture was transferred to a baking dish and cooked until the rice turned tender and the flavors married into something cohesive and satisfying. For seniors living alone, Texas hash offered the advantage of a complete meal that improved with reheating, each day the spices deepening and the textures mellowing. The dish appeared in community cookbooks from Texas to Ohio, adapted by cooks who understood that regional names mattered less than solid technique and affordable ingredients. 1 pound of ground beef could provide nearly a week of solo dinners, each serving hearty enough to satisfy without anything more elaborate. Simple seasonings applied with confidence created meals worth remembering. Skillet beef and macaroni was the busy cook's answer to dinners that needed to appear quickly without sacrificing heartiness or flavor. Ground beef was browned directly in a large skillet, then uncooked macaroni was added along with canned tomatoes, water, and simple seasonings. Everything simmered together, covered until the pasta absorbed the liquid and turned tender, the beef and tomatoes creating a sauce that clung to every piece. For seniors who found themselves exhausted by elaborate cooking, this one-pan meal meant dinner in 30 minutes with minimal cleanup. The recipe required no draining, no separate pots, just patience while the skillet worked its magic. Cheese could be stirred in at the end for richness, or the dish served plain for those watching their budgets. This was practical cooking that home economists promoted during decades when efficiency mattered as much as nutrition. The dish comforted seniors eating alone, providing both sustenance and satisfaction. Shipwreck casserole earned its dramatic name from the layers of ingredients that seemed to wash up together in one baking dish. Raw ground beef was spread across the bottom, followed by sliced potatoes, then onions, then celery, then rice, all layered without mixing. Canned tomatoes were poured over everything. The dish was covered tightly, and it baked low and slow until the meat cooked through and the vegetables softened. For seniors cooking alone, this was the ultimate in hands-off dinner preparation. Assemble, cover, bake, and return an hour later to a complete meal. The layers stayed distinct enough to see but melded together in flavor, each component absorbing the tomato juices and beef drippings. The recipe required no browning, no stirring, no watching, just patience and a reliable oven. Church cookbooks throughout the Midwest featured variations, some adding kidney beans or green peppers. One casserole could feed a senior for nearly a week, each reheated portion revealing new depths of flavor. Beef and cabbage skillet was the thrifty cook's answer to stretching a half-pound of meat into a meal that could feed 4 or provide days of leftovers. Ground beef was browned with onions until fragrant, then shredded cabbage was added by the handful until the skillet seemed impossibly full. As the cabbage cooked down, it released moisture that created a natural sauce, wilting into sweet tenderness while the beef seasoned every strand. A splash of vinegar or tomato sauce added brightness, while salt and pepper brought everything into focus. For seniors with gardens or access to farmers' markets, cabbage was one of the cheapest vegetables available, a single head lasting weeks in the refrigerator. The dish required only one pan and minimal attention, cooking down while seniors rested or tended to other tasks. Eastern European immigrants brought versions of this recipe to America, but it became beloved across all communities that valued humble ingredients. The result was filling, nutritious, and deeply satisfying. Unstuffed pepper casserole delivered all the flavors of traditional stuffed peppers without the fussy work of hollowing out vegetables and arranging them carefully. Ground beef was browned with onions, then diced green peppers were added along with rice, canned tomatoes, and seasonings that reminded everyone of the original dish. Everything was combined in a baking dish, topped with cheese, and baked until bubbling and golden. For seniors whose hands had grown unsteady or whose patience for intricate cooking had waned, this casserole was liberation, the same beloved flavors in a fraction of the time. The rice absorbed the tomato juices while the peppers softened but retained enough texture to announce their presence. One casserole provided multiple meals, reheating even better the second and third day as flavors continued to develop. The recipe appeared in senior center newsletters, recommended specifically for those cooking alone who wanted familiar comfort without exhausting themselves in the kitchen. Cowboy beans with beef combined the heartiness of baked beans with the protein punch of ground beef, creating a one-pot meal that satisfied the deepest hunger. Ground beef was browned with onions, then canned pork and beans were added along with barbecue sauce, brown sugar, mustard, and a splash of vinegar for tang. The mixture simmered until thick and glossy, the beans absorbing all the meaty, sweet flavors, while the beef added substance that plain beans could never match. For seniors, this dish represented economical cooking that stretched resources without sacrificing satisfaction. A single batch could last nearly a week, improving with each reheating as the sugars caramelized and the flavors deepened. The recipe appeared at potlucks and church suppers throughout the South and Midwest, where cooks competed quietly to see whose version earned the most compliments. Served with cornbread or over rice, cowboy beans with beef proved that simple ingredients combined with care created meals that nourished both body and soul. Cottage pie with ground beef brought British comfort food to American tables, adapted for budgets that couldn't afford lamb or expensive cuts. Ground beef was browned with onions and carrots, seasoned with Worcestershire sauce and herbs, then spread into a baking dish. Mashed potatoes were piped or spooned over the top, creating a blanket of creamy starch that would brown and crisp in the oven. The dish baked until the filling bubbled around the edges and the potato peaks turned golden. For seniors cooking alone, cottage pie was practical magic. A complete meal of protein, vegetables, and starch in one dish that reheated beautifully for days. The mashed potato topping could be made from scratch or from leftover potatoes needing to be used. The filling accepted whatever vegetables were available: peas, corn, green beans, or simply onions when the pantry ran low. This was adaptable cooking that seniors understood instinctively, adjusting ingredients to match what was available. Chili Mac merged two American comfort food traditions into one satisfying bowl that seniors could prepare quickly and enjoy for days. Ground beef was browned with onions and garlic, then chili powder, cumin, and paprika were added until the kitchen filled with warm aromas. Canned tomatoes and kidney beans joined the mixture, along with uncooked elbow macaroni and enough water to cook the pasta directly in the sauce. Everything simmered until the macaroni turned tender and the liquid reduced into thick chili that coated every noodle. For seniors living alone, this one-pot meal eliminated multiple dishes and provided balanced nutrition in every serving. The beans added fiber and protein, while the pasta provided bulk that made small portions satisfying. The recipe was forgiving: more liquid if it seemed dry, more seasoning if flavors needed boosting. Church cookbooks featured dozens of variations. The dish proved that combining two traditions created something greater than either component alone. Hamburger corn, pone pie, layered savory beef filling beneath a golden cornbread crust that absorbed all the delicious juices from below. Ground beef was browned with onions, then combined with canned tomatoes, corn, and seasonings until thick and fragrant. The mixture was poured into a baking dish, and cornbread batter was spread over the top. The batter could be homemade or from a mix, depending on energy and ambition. As the pie baked, the cornbread rose and browned while the filling bubbled underneath, the bottom layer of bread turning soft and almost custard-like from absorbing the meat juices. For seniors who remembered the Depression or wartime rationing, this dish represented the kind of resourceful cooking that turned modest ingredients into something that felt abundant. One pie could feed 4 people or provide a week of solo meals, each slice revealing the satisfying contrast between crispy top and tender bottom. The recipe survived because it delivered genuine comfort without requiring expensive ingredients. Mock ravioli casserole delivered pasta comfort without the tedious work of stuffing individual pieces. Ground beef was browned with onions and garlic, then combined with tomato sauce, Italian seasonings, and ricotta or cottage cheese stirred through for richness. Cooked bow tie pasta or small shells were folded into the mixture. Everything was transferred to a baking dish, and mozzarella cheese was spread generously over the top. The casserole baked until bubbling and golden, the cheese forming a stretchy blanket over the layers beneath. For seniors whose hands could no longer manage delicate pasta work, this casserole provided the same flavors with a fraction of the effort. The cottage cheese melted into the sauce, creating pockets of creaminess that mimicked the ricotta filling of traditional ravioli. One casserole could provide meals for nearly a week, each reheated portion just as satisfying as the first. The recipe spread through Italian-American communities and beyond, beloved by anyone who craved comfort without complication. Beef noodle soup was the answer to cold nights and tired bones, a pot of warmth that required minimal effort but delivered maximum comfort. Ground beef was browned with onions and celery, then covered with broth and water until the pot was nearly full. Egg noodles were added along with diced carrots and simple seasonings: salt, pepper, bay leaf, perhaps a pinch of thyme. The soup simmered until the noodles turned soft and the vegetables yielded to gentle pressure, the broth growing rich with beef flavor and starchy body from the pasta. For seniors living alone, this soup meant several days of meals from one cooking session, each bowl reheated in minutes when energy ran low. The noodles broke down slightly with reheating, thickening the broth into something almost stew-like that clung to spoons and warmed from the inside. This was the kind of practical cooking that kept seniors fed during winters when leaving the house felt impossible and elaborate meals seemed beyond reach. Hamburger hash transformed leftover potatoes and a small amount of meat into breakfast, lunch, or dinner depending on when hunger struck. Ground beef was browned in a cast-iron skillet, then diced cooked potatoes were added along with onions and whatever vegetables needed using up. Peppers, corn, peas, anything that would benefit from crisping. The mixture was pressed flat and cooked without stirring until a golden crust formed on the bottom, then flipped in sections to crisp the other side. For seniors, hash represented the ultimate in waste-free cooking. Nothing went into the garbage when it could become tomorrow's meal. The crispy bits were the reward for patience, developing only if the cook resisted the urge to stir constantly. Topped with a fried egg or served alongside toast, hash was a complete meal that cost almost nothing and delivered tremendous satisfaction. The recipe required no written instructions because every cook understood the basic principle: combine, press, crisp, and eat. Salisbury steak with mushroom gravy transformed ground beef into something that felt like a proper restaurant dinner. The meat was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, and finely minced onion, then shaped into oval patties that resembled small steaks. Pan-fried until browned on both sides, the patties were set aside while sliced mushrooms and onions cooked in the drippings. Flour thickened the mixture into rich brown gravy that was poured over the steaks and simmered until everything melded. For seniors who remembered when Salisbury steak appeared on diner menus across America, this dish brought back memories of simpler times when a hot meal made an evening feel special. The mushroom gravy elevated humble ground beef into something worthy of the good china, especially when served alongside mashed potatoes. One batch provided several meals for those cooking alone, each reheating just as satisfying as the first. The recipe proved that presentation and technique mattered as much as ingredients. Beef and rice casserole was the reliable weeknight dinner that required almost no attention once assembled. Ground beef was browned with onions, then combined with uncooked rice, canned tomatoes, and beef broth in a baking dish. The casserole was covered tightly and baked until the rice absorbed all the liquid, emerging fluffy and infused with meaty flavor. For seniors who found standing at the stove exhausting, this hands-off approach meant dinner practically made itself while they rested. The dish was forgiving of timing. An extra 10 minutes in the oven rarely caused problems. Cheese could be sprinkled on top during the final minutes for extra richness, or the casserole served plain for simpler tastes. Church cookbooks featured dozens of variations, each family convinced their version was best. The casserole provided balanced nutrition and reheated beautifully throughout the week. This was the kind of practical cooking that kept seniors fed without demanding too much energy or attention. Picadillo brought Latin American flavors to American tables through generations of immigrant cooks who adapted their family recipes. Ground beef was browned with onions, garlic, and green peppers, then combined with tomatoes, olives, raisins, and spices that created a sweet, savory balance unlike typical American cooking. The mixture simmered until the flavors melded and the sauce thickened around the meat. Served over rice or stuffed into tortillas, picadillo was a complete meal that introduced seniors to new flavor combinations while remaining affordable. The raisins added unexpected sweetness that balanced the briny olives, creating complexity from simple ingredients. For seniors living in communities with Latin American neighbors, this dish often arrived as a gift from friends who wanted to share their heritage. The recipe spread through word of mouth and handwritten cards exchanged between women who understood that food built bridges. Picadillo proved that budget cooking could be adventurous without being intimidating. Beef and bean burritos turned ground beef into handheld meals that were easy to prepare and even easier to reheat. Ground beef was seasoned with cumin, chili powder, and garlic, then combined with refried beans and wrapped in flour tortillas with cheese and whatever toppings were available. The burritos could be eaten immediately or wrapped in foil and frozen for later, providing seniors with ready-made meals that required only reheating. For those cooking alone, a single batch yielded enough burritos for an entire week of quick lunches or dinners. The combination of beans and beef created complete protein, while the tortilla provided convenient portability. Seniors could customize each burrito to their preferences, More cheese for some, extra beans for others, a splash of hot sauce for those who liked heat. The recipe required no special equipment or techniques, just basic seasoning and the willingness to roll. Burritos represented the kind of practical, adaptable cooking that kept seniors fed without fuss or complication. Hamburger vegetable bake layered ground beef with whatever vegetables the refrigerator held, creating a flexible casserole that never tasted the same way twice. Ground beef was crumbled raw into a baking dish, then covered with sliced potatoes, carrots, onions, and green beans, any combination that needed using before it spoiled. Canned tomato soup diluted with water was poured over everything. The dish was covered, and it baked until the meat cooked through and vegetables softened. For seniors, this casserole solved the problem of produce wilting in the crisper drawer. Nothing went to waste when everything could be layered into the bake. The tomato soup created sauce while the vegetables released their own moisture, keeping everything tender and flavorful. One casserole provided multiple meals without requiring precise recipes or expensive ingredients. The dish taught practical lessons about using what you had rather than following rigid instructions. This was survival cooking elevated to comfort. Swedish meatballs with cream gravy brought Scandinavian tradition to American tables, adapted for budgets that couldn't afford specialty ingredients. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, minced onion, and a touch of allspice, the signature seasoning that distinguished these meatballs. Shaped small and browned in butter, the meatballs were set aside while cream gravy was built from the drippings. Flour, butter, and milk combined into a velvety sauce that cradled the meatballs in richness. Served over egg noodles or mashed potatoes, this dish felt elegant despite its humble origins. For seniors who remembered church potlucks and holiday buffets, Swedish meatballs carried memories of celebration. The allspice gave warmth without heat, a subtle complexity that made people ask about the recipe. One batch could be stretched across several meals, the gravy reheating smoothly. This was the kind of dish that made ordinary evenings feel special. Tamale pie brought the flavors of traditional tamales without the hours of labor that authentic preparation required. Ground beef was seasoned with chili powder, cumin, and garlic, then combined with corn, tomatoes, and olives in a baking dish. Cornbread batter was spread over the top and the pie baked until the crust turned golden and the filling bubbled around the edges. For seniors who loved Southwestern cooking but lacked energy for elaborate preparations, tamale pie was the perfect compromise. The cornbread absorbed the spiced juices from below, creating a bottom layer that was almost custard-like. One pie could feed 4 people or provide a solo cook with nearly a week of satisfying dinners. The recipe appeared in community cookbooks throughout the Southwest and spread wherever cooks discovered that ground beef and cornbread made natural partners. Simple ingredients combined with bold seasonings created genuine comfort. Meatball sub casserole captured all the flavors of the classic sandwich in a form that was easier to prepare and serve. Ground beef was mixed with Italian seasonings, shaped into small meatballs, and browned until crusty on the outside. The meatballs were nestled into a baking dish, covered with marinara sauce and mozzarella cheese, then baked until bubbling and golden. Sliced hoagie rolls were served alongside for building individual sandwiches or soaking up the sauce. For seniors who remembered grabbing meatball subs from neighborhood delis, this casserole brought back those flavors without requiring a trip out. The meatballs stayed tender under their blanket of cheese while the sauce grew rich in the oven's heat. One casserole provided multiple meals, each serving as satisfying as visiting the deli, but far more economical. The recipe proved that beloved flavors could be adapted for home cooking. Hobo dinner packets were the ultimate in individual portion cooking, wrapping ground beef and vegetables in foil for baking without any dishes to wash afterward. A portion of seasoned ground beef was placed on heavy foil along with sliced potatoes, carrots, onions, and sometimes a pat of butter or splash of Worcestershire sauce. The foil was sealed tightly and the packets baked until the meat cooked through and the vegetables softened in their own steam. For seniors cooking alone, this method meant no casserole dishes to scrub. Just crumple the foil and throw it away. Each packet was a complete meal perfectly portioned for one person. The technique dated back to camping traditions, but proved equally useful in home kitchens where energy for cleanup was limited. The vegetables absorbed the beef juices while the foil trapped all the flavors inside. This was practical cooking at its most efficient. Ground beef stroganoff simplified the classic dish for cooks who wanted rich flavor without fussy technique. Ground beef was browned with onions and mushrooms, then combined with cream of mushroom soup and sour cream for instant richness. The mixture was served over egg noodles cooked soft, each strand coated in creamy sauce that tasted far more elaborate than its preparation suggested. For seniors, this version eliminated the need for expensive cuts and lengthy braising. The soup provided body and umami, while the sour cream added the traditional tang that made stroganoff distinctive. One skillet produced enough for several meals, reheating smoothly without curdling. The recipe spread through women's magazines during decades when convenience products made elaborate-tasting dishes accessible. Ground beef stroganoff proved that shortcuts weren't cheating. They were smart cooking that produced satisfying results. Shepherd's pie, the cozy blanket of food. This classic comfort food originated with the clever idea of layering leftover ground beef with mashed potatoes. Shepherd's pie is believed to have been invented in the early 1800s. During this time, housewives were struggling to find innovative ways to recycle the leftovers that their husbands and kids had turned up their noses at. Now, buckle up for a brief history lesson. The British and some of the Protestant Irish converts became the new rulers, while Irish Catholics who refused to convert became peasant farm workers living in humble homes referred to as cottages. Around 1589, Sir Walter Raleigh introduced potato farming to Ireland, and over time, potatoes gained acceptance in Ireland since they were not only delicious but also affordable for the poor. Towards the end of the 18th century, a new dish known as cottage pie came about. It is believed that it originated as a way for women to make use of the leftovers to avoid food wastage. After making the delicious weekend roast, all unused meat was carefully repurposed into a pie using affordable potatoes as a crust. Shepherd's pie became one of the best ways to deal with leftover meat. As an added bonus, it was, and still is, extremely delicious. Those interesting casseroles don't just end with peanut butter. Next on our list, we're going to be dealing with beef and grape casserole, which is an example of mid-century American cooking really leaving no stone unturned. It was a combination of flavors that was pretty unexpected. Most people think that this dish came out around the 1940s to the 1960s, and that makes sense. Fruit-based experimentation with your typical average Sunday meals was a lot more common. What was interesting was the influences for this dish. Swedish meatballs with lingonberries was another thing that was growing really popular as a recipe for home cooks, and a lot of Americans tried to come up with their own spin-offs of recipes like this. Typically, it had ground or cubed beef, and this was browned with onions. Then, it would be combined with grape jelly or entire grapes, and a sauce would be made for the broth. Tomato paste or Worcestershire sauce would also go in this broth, and some versions also used canned mushroom soup and sour cream to help create a more velvety texture. While the dish was definitely really ambitious and set out to accomplish a lot of bold, difficult-to-work-with flavors, it ended up not really lasting past the 60s. It seems like that one decade was an isolated incident as far as casseroles were considered. Still, is this something you would like to try? Or do you like your grapes on a separate plate from your meat? Sage-infused ground beef patties might sound like something you would find in a fancy restaurant today, but back then, it was just another stroke of pure homegrown genius. Sage was everywhere in the right parts of the country, and it did not cost a dime to pick some fresh sprigs. Mixed into ground beef with a little salt and a whole lot of care, the result was a smoky, savory patty that smelled so good cooking, you would swear it could make a grown man cry. Fried up in an old cast iron pan until the edges were crispy and the middle stayed juicy, these patties were tossed onto plates with a scoop of beans, maybe some fried potatoes if you were lucky. They were not just filling, they were soul-satisfying. And once you tasted beef lifted up by wild sage, you would wonder why anyone ever bothered with plain salt and pepper again. Speaking of dishes that hit you right in the comfort zone, the next one was a staple at tables that needed stretching a meal just a little bit farther. chow mein hot dish was a Midwestern potluck legend. It walked into the room carrying the scent of soy sauce and sizzling beef and left behind nothing but an empty casserole dish and a few requests for the recipe. Born sometime between post-war optimism and the suburban casserole boom, this dish took inspiration from Chinese-American takeout and made it its own. Ground beef was browned with chopped onions and celery, then mixed with a savory sauce, usually soy sauce and a can of cream of mushroom soup. That combination might sound odd, but it made everything come together with a velvety, umami-heavy punch. But the real fun started when you dumped a whole can of crunchy chow mein noodles right on top before baking. But if that flavor combination sounds bold, buckle up, because the next dish on this forgotten road trip adds soda to the skillet and somehow makes it work. Don't confuse regular old boring meatloaf with this special Dutch oven meatloaf with crackers. No, don't get your wires crossed, it's definitely different. Back in the day, Grandma really knew how to jazz things up and make this classic into something unexpected, just by adding some crackers. When crackers are added to the mix, they become like little sponges full of flavor, absorbing juices and adding to the texture of the dish. But this still doesn't really make it that different from the regular meatloaf. So where does the difference lie? Well, it lies in the Dutch oven baking. This oven, or pot as some might say, locks in flavor and moisture like nothing you've ever seen before. The result? A tender, savory meatloaf with a perfectly crisp outer layer. And Grandma knew how to serve it right, with a thick layer of ketchup glaze on top. Because sometimes, more is more. Plus, when you add a side of mashed potatoes, it'll be like you're biting into nostalgia. Back in the Great Depression, meatloaf was a go-to because it stretched a small amount of beef into a meal for the whole family. And crackers were cheaper than breadcrumbs, and we all know Grandma knows how to save some bucks. I know some of you aren't fond of soupy dishes, but please hear me out. Hamburger upside-down pie is really one that's for people who like to experiment with their food. It has a lot of practical thought put into it, but somebody clearly had a lot of fun making this. You take ground beef, and then you take the concept of a baked pie, and what do you get when you mix those two together? A layer of seasoned ground beef packed beautifully at the bottom of a baking dish, laden with onions, tomato sauce, biscuit crumbs, and a cornbread topping. This pie would be baked and then flipped upside down so the bottom layer of beef was the first thing you had, and it was filling enough to feed your entire family and then some. This dish was a part of resourceful home cooking, and it makes me agree with something I saw earlier. It said that being bored is actually good for you because it brings out your creativity. I think that people had so little to work with in these times that they were for once thinking genuinely outside of the box, and sometimes that led to some actual eureka moments, and other times it was fun, little interactive dishes like this. While it wasn't remembered much, it was still a pretty convenient meal that you could even freeze for later if you weren't feeling like eating it all in one go. Understandably, because this is a behemoth to take down on your own. If you're a fan of retro cooking though, this is a good place to start. The ground beef and heirloom. Bean chili was not just a dinner, it was a memory in a bowl. Picture a heavy pot hanging over a campfire filled with ground beef simmering alongside a rainbow of heirloom beans. Pinto beans, black beans, cranberry beans, all the ones your grandmother insisted were better than anything from a can. The beef gave it depth, the beans gave it body, and a handful of crushed wild herbs gave it a smoky aroma that floated through the night air. It was not the tongue-searing chili you find at competitions today either. This was smooth, mellow, and rich, made to be eaten with big hunks of bread or scooped right out of the pot with a wooden spoon. After a long day of work or a night under the stars, nothing tasted better. If you were lucky, there was always a second pot heating up for breakfast too, because good chili was not something you left behind. Now, if you thought a pot of campfire chili could make a night unforgettable, just wait until you see how a little cedar smoke could turn plain beef into backyard magic. Coca-Cola beef skillet might sound like something dreamed up at a county fair food stand, but back in the 1960s, it was a weeknight marvel. You took a skillet, browned up a pound of ground beef with onions, added a healthy squeeze of ketchup, and then, here's the twist, poured in a splash of Coca-Cola. That was the secret sauce. The soda added a surprising depth, a sticky sweetness that balanced the tang of the ketchup and rounded out the beefy base. It cooked down into something thick and glossy, like a glaze that made every bite feel more indulgent than it had any right to be. Kids went wild for it, and parents loved that it took maybe 15 minutes to get on the table. Coca-Cola beef skillet was the edible proof that the best meals often come from a bit of whimsy and whatever is sitting in the fridge door. And if pasta was your pantry fallback, then the next recipe might just be your new meatloaf obsession. Ah, the classic beef and potato casserole. Reminds me of a time when 40-step recipes from Instagram didn't exist, and it was all about simplicity and comfort. The layers of browned ground beef, golden potatoes, and a creamy sauce could warm even the coldest hearts. Topped with a generous amount of cheese, of course, because when you're at grandma's, more cheese equals more love. Why was this dish suddenly forgotten? Maybe it's because all of the new recipes call for superfoods and gluten-free alternatives, which this casserole is definitely not. It's a classic, old-school ground beef dish. The magic of beef and potato casserole lies in its simplicity. It's basically just a few staple ingredients thrown together and baked until bubbly. No fuss. It's hearty and delicious. Plus, who doesn't love a meal where everything is combined into one pan? Less cleanup means more time in front of the TV watching your favorite 80s sitcom. Seconds are almost always guaranteed, so you could also say that this dish is perfect for meal stretches and it's budget-friendly. No stories. Beef stuffed donuts are a really bizarre thing to think about. They actually have been a part of tradition for so long. What tradition, you might ask? Well, savory fried dough dishes have been pretty consistently popular across America, believe it or not. Just look at all the meat pies we have. Unlike today's sweet donuts topped with chocolate frosting and red velvet, though, these were a popular way to make some portable food that also filled you up. Different versions of meat-filled fried donuts looked like beef mixed with onions and garlic, or gravy, or even cheese on the inside. So why did something so good disappear? Well, it's just hard to keep up with all the different things the world had to offer. Pre-packaged donuts, frozen ones, ready-made baked goods, all of it meant that people were far less interested in doing basic home baking the usual. Nowadays even, if someone does want to get cooking, they usually think about something that can at least get a couple of views. Nostalgic beef and sweet corn fry casserole was the dish that looked like a mess but tasted like a memory. Imagine browned ground beef bubbling under a thick layer of golden sweet corn kernels, all tied together with a few shakes of salt and pepper and a little bit of cream if you had it. Baked until the top got crispy and the edges turned caramel brown, it was the kind of casserole that made the whole house smell like comfort. In the 1970s, every family potluck or backyard gathering had at least one version of it, usually scribbled onto a crumpled index card or passed down by word of mouth. Sweet corn was cheap, beef was precious, and when you married the two together, you got a dish that somehow managed to feel luxurious, even when times were lean. The first spoonful always hit you with that sweet, salty magic, and before you knew it, you were scraping the sides of the pan for just one more bite. And if you thought this casserole was the gold standard of hearty, simple eats, just wait until you dive into a beef and hominy masterpiece that practically invented stick-to-your-ribs cooking. Sloppy Joe pie was what happened when someone decided that sloppy joes deserved a throne. You started with the classic filling, ground beef, tomato sauce or ketchup, a hint of mustard or Worcestershire if you were feeling adventurous, all simmered until it thickened into that perfect sweet, savory sloppy joe consistency. But instead of sandwiching it in a soft bun, you would pour it into a casserole dish and crown it with a golden biscuit crust. Sometimes it was homemade dough, sometimes it was straight from a can, but it always rose into a fluffy, buttery topping that made the whole dish feel complete. Some versions used cornbread instead, which gave it a southern twist with just the right amount of sweetness. And even though it was born in a time when ground beef ruled the dinner table, Sloppy Joe pie had enough personality to still turn heads today. But if you thought ground beef had done it all, Just wait until you meet the recipe that turned soda pop into secret sauce. In the 1960s, there was a rising demand for all sorts of experimentative casserole recipes. One of those happened to beef and peanut butter casseroles, and before you exit the video, hear me out. Beef and peanut butter casserole is a fascinating example of how people can get really creative when the stakes are high. This is a dish that has its roots in Great Depression thrifting and ingenuity. If you think it sounds really unusual, you're right, but you're also probably only thinking about this from a flavor perspective instead of what it can do for your body. Most people realized that the protein potential of this was off the charts. It combined peanut butter, which was already carrying loads of the stuff with beef, and it was a meal that could be stretched out to feed an entire family. Plus, despite how we regularly associate peanut butter with sweeter confections, it's actually been something that's constantly thrown into savory recipes too. This was a casserole that emerged all the way in the 1930s or 1940s, but peaked in the 60s. And this was because it was only in those early decades that peanut butter even began to be commonly available in most people's homes. It's got a lot in common with some Thai peanut beef dishes too. Crispy corn cakes. Stuffed with seasoned beef were one of those foods you could smell cooking before you even stepped into the event. Little golden discs sizzling in big iron skillets, stuffed to the brim with ground beef seasoned with paprika, onions, and a pinch of chili powder if you wanted to wake up your taste buds. The outside was crunchy and golden, the inside savory and juicy. It was a dance of textures that made you keep reaching for just one more. The trick was to keep the corn cakes thin enough that they crisped up, but thick enough to hold all that seasoned beef inside without falling apart. At powwows and fairs, you would see kids running around with one in each hand, faces smeared with beefy goodness, while the elders sat back and nodded approvingly. It was simple, it was satisfying, and it was the perfect food for big gatherings where nobody had time for forks and knives. And if you think crispy stuffed corn cakes sound irresistible, wait until you pull up a camp chair and hear about the kind of chili that made starry nights and crackling fires taste even better. Rag mop casserole was not just a recipe. It was a reflection of how weirdly wonderful American kitchens could be in the 1950s. Inspired by the popular novelty song of the same name, this dish felt like someone took everything comforting about a weeknight dinner and tossed it in a baking dish on a dare. It all started with ground beef, browned and seasoned in a skillet, then layered with canned spaghetti. You know, the kind drowning in that slightly sweet tomato sauce, and finished off with a cheesy breadcrumb topping that always ended up extra crispy. You could tell this came from a time when convenience and flavor had to shake hands in a hurry. Moms loved it because it used shelf-stable pantry staples. And in a lot of kitchens across small-town America, it was. But if you think that was comfort food turned up to 11, just wait until you hear about the next one, a dish that was practically designed to stretch $1 and fill a table. Another staple of our United States cuisine, beef and bean chili. Ooh, my grandma knew how to make that chili right. This wasn't the watery, mild stuff you might get from a can. No, this was a thick, hearty, beef and bean-packed chili that stuck to your ribs and made you forget about the cold weather outside. Ground beef, kidney beans, tomatoes, and a fiery blend of spices. Grandma's secret weapon was always a dash of chili powder and maybe a little cocoa powder if she was feeling fancy. Simmered to perfection, the rich, meaty sauce soaked into every bite. And the beans? Well, they weren't just filler. They added a creamy texture that balanced the beefy goodness. Whether served with cornbread, crackers, or just a dollop of sour cream on top, Grandma's chili could warm even the coldest of souls. Now, you might have noticed how I'm trying to avoid mentioning the origins of chili. And if you're from the south of the United States, you probably know why. Chili has roots in the American Southwest, but variations can be found all over the country. Some swear by no beans, which may come as a shocker, I know, but at Grandma's beans were a must. They made the chili stretch further, which meant more leftovers, because the only thing better than chili is day-old chili. Mock turtle soup is something that I'm dead sure you would not have seen coming. See, it's something that came out of 18th century England as a substitute for real turtle soup. which, by the way, was insanely popular in these times. People used to actually consider it something of a delicacy. During the Georgian and Victorian eras, green turtle soup would have sea turtles in it, and it was an incredibly prized dish popular among the local aristocracy. Before you crack a nice little cutting-edge joke about how British cuisine is the strangest thing on the planet, this was also popular in American high society, and it's something that got us through the Depression. That's right, mock turtle soup was something that people would make as much as they could when real turtles weren't around or were too expensive. Now, real turtle meat is known for having an incredibly rich and gelatinous broth. The key to mock turtle soup was just to start with the head of a calf or an oxtail, boil it down with a blend of vegetables like carrots, celery, and onions and a spice rub, and slow cooking it. Next, once all the natural collagen was extracted, people would usually add in wine or sherry or Madeira, and this was really common in traditional turtle soup. It replicates the texture of the actual turtle meat, and cooks would try very hard to get that down right. It's one of the most interesting pieces of mock food culture we have, and it shows how good people got at imitating different kinds of foods without the core ingredients. Reservation-style ground beef and wild onion tacos were the kind of everyday magic that kept folks smiling even when times were tight. Ground beef was stretched thin, seasoned with salt, pepper, and whatever wild onions could be foraged nearby. If you have never tasted wild onions, you are missing out. They hit somewhere between a chive and a spring onion, with this bold, peppery snap that made plain beef sing like a church choir. Wrapped up in soft tortillas or sometimes even more fry bread, they were simple, satisfying, and straight from the heart. This was not a meal that needed fancy cheese or salsa piled a mile high. It was pure, straight-talking flavor that left you licking your fingers and hoping there was just one more taco hiding somewhere on the plate. Now, if you think beef and onions are a match made in heaven, wait until you taste how a little bit of sage could turn a beef patty into something unforgettable. Hamburger spoon-bread casserole was as southern as sitting on a porch swing with a glass of sweet tea, and it brought all the heartwarming charm you would expect from something served at a 1940s church supper. Spoon-bread, for the uninitiated, is not exactly bread and not quite pudding. It is somewhere in between. It is soft, warm, and creamy, like cornbread that has decided to ditch its edges and just melt in your mouth. Now imagine that heavenly texture layered over seasoned ground beef. The beef underneath was usually cooked with onions, garlic, and a dash of pepper or hot sauce. This dish was a hug in a casserole dish, soft, savory, and so filling you might not need anything else on the plate. It was also one of those recipes that always tasted better the next day if there were leftovers at all. But if this feels too soft and cozy for your taste, let us head into something born straight from scarcity and grit. Moving on to something that is American-made, Salisbury steak, seasoned ground beef patties, pan-seared to perfection, and then smothered in a rich onion-loaded gravy. What's not to like? I bet most of you haven't heard the backstory of Salisbury steak, so let me educate you. It is best known as a staple of TV dinners and bargain buffets. The Salisbury steak actually has its beginnings as a proposed cure for digestive illness during the Civil War. If you didn't know, digestive illnesses killed more soldiers during the Civil War than combat did, and a diet rich in beefsteak and coffee was one suggested cure. The inventor of the Salisbury steak, Dr. James Henry Salisbury, was an early pioneer of germ theory and of diet being a factor in health. While some of his ideas may be outdated today, his affection for beefsteak and his promotion of its positive effect on health have persisted. While patties of ground beef are common fare, the Salisbury steak was cemented in the American lexicon during World War I. In many English-speaking countries, there was a movement to limit the use of German-sounding words, so the Army served Salisbury steak rather than Hamburg steak and Liberty sandwiches instead of hamburgers. Sure, it may not be the health trend it once was, but let's be honest, it's a comfort food icon for a reason. Stuffed prune meatballs are a really good example of sweet-savory cooking. This was something you would see commonly throughout both Europe and America, and that was doubly true if we're talking about the 19th and 20th centuries. This was a dish that was a mix of prunes with one of three different kinds of meats. People would either use beef, pork, or veal. And after the meat had been softened to the point it could be shaped and pressed into a meatball, prunes would be stuffed inside them. Some people were a bit freakier than others and would shove an entire prune up there, but some would chop it first. While this might seem like an innovative idea, it's actually not all that new. Dried fruit and meat combinations, especially sweet and savory ones, are really old ideas. They go back all the way to several different cultures present in Europe. You'll find them in Scandinavian, British, Jewish, and German cultures, and if you go on over to Asia, you will still find many sweet and savory combinations. This was a dish that did really well in the 20th century, especially whenever there were Jewish holidays, but over time, the American palate started to settle down with what was familiar instead of stuff like this. It couldn't really last and compete with regular meatballs. Traditional cedar smoked beef skewers were one of those dishes that proved you did not need 1,000 ingredients to create something unforgettable. Beef was marinated with just salt, pepper, and maybe a brush of honey if you were feeling wild, then threaded onto wooden sticks and slow roasted over cedar branches. The cedar smoke wrapped itself around the beef, sinking deep into every fiber, turning a simple skewer into a feast that could make even the grumpiest neighbor smile. You would find folks gathered around fire pits, laughing and trading stories while keeping an eye on their skewers, turning them every so often to get that perfect even char. There was something about the smell of cedar smoke that felt like a hug from nature itself, especially when it meant that dinner was almost ready. Kids would sneak bites straight off the sticks, adults would pile them high on plates, and nobody ever left hungry. And if you thought cedar smoke could work miracles on plain beef, wait until you see how mustard greens and ground beef teamed up for one of the most overlooked flavor combos in history. Beef birds, sometimes called mock steak rolls, were the kind of food that made you feel like you were having a fancy dinner, even if the meat came from the budget bin. The idea was simple but genius. Take seasoned ground beef, flatten it out like you are making an edible canvas, roll it up with stuffing or sometimes chopped onions inside, then tie or skewer it like it is some French roast on Sunday dinner. These little bundles were browned in a pan and sometimes finished in gravy, soaking up every bit of flavor like they had been waiting all day for it. The texture was soft, the taste was rich, and the presentation, well, that part made you feel like you were dining at a place that had real cloth napkins. They were a perfect disguise for humble ingredients. And just when you think the American kitchen could not get more inventive, along came a dish that turned ground beef into a noodle-topped flavor bomb with a crunchy surprise. Beef paprikash. It sounds complicated to make, but I know your grandma, just like mine, made it without batting an eye. Imagine tender beef simmered in a rich paprika-infused sauce, bursting with smoky and spicy flavors. This dish is like goulash's cousin, wouldn't you say? Beef paprikash is a traditional Hungarian dish where it was a hit in kitchens where spices were basically like family heirlooms. But, contrary to popular beliefs here in the United States, paprikash is traditionally made without beef or macaroni noodles. Shocking, right? Its origins date back to the 9th century Magyar shepherds as a simple meat and onion stew prepared in heavy iron kettles known as bograks. In the 15th century, invading Ottoman Turks introduced a new spice to Hungary, paprika. While the rest of Europe remained lukewarm towards this red chili pepper from the New World, Hungary embraced it, and paprika has since become a defining element of Hungarian cuisine. Paprikash is kind of in between a soup and a stew. Unlike some stews, paprikash is not overly packed full of beef and vegetables. It is a little more brothy. But through the cooking process, the broth becomes a little thicker and very rich in flavor. And here's another fun fact for you. Paprika is actually made from dried bell peppers and has been around since the 16th century. And if you thought paprika was just for sprinkling on deviled eggs, think again. Banana meatloaf is an incredibly practical recipe that emerged from times where frugality was almost as much of a virtue as cleanliness. Rationing, resourcefulness, and economic hardship were how everyone was getting by. And this was only more true during the worst parts of the Great Depression and World War II. Home cooks were forced to work with very few ingredients, and the typical banana meatloaf recipe was something that was very bare bones, and required little prep work or elaborate lists of ingredients to create. All you needed for this was pork mixed with mashed ripe bananas. Throw in some breadcrumbs, which could be repurposed from stale bread, onions, which most people were already stocking up on or growing, and basic seasonings like pepper, nutmeg, and salt, and you had yourself a pretty all-right dish. The banana worked as a binder and a natural sweetener, and it would often work really well with Worcestershire sauce, believe it or not. It helped balance out the incredible sweetness of ripe bananas. This dish did particularly well in Hawaii, where it was appreciated for blending in with already existing preferences. Smothered ground. Beef and hominy was the kind of meal that did not just fill your plate, it filled your soul. Ground beef cooked slow and easy, seasoned with just enough spice to keep things interesting, and then tossed together with hominy so tender it almost melted in your mouth. If you have never had hominy before, just picture corn but bigger, puffier, and somehow even more satisfying. When the juices from the beef soaked into every kernel, you got a dish that was buttery, savory, and rich enough to carry you through an entire winter's night. Families back then knew that when you needed a dinner that would power you through long days and longer nights, this was it. It was not fancy food, but it was food that made you feel like you were winning at life, even when the cupboards were looking bare. Now, if you thought beef and hominy could turn a plain night into something unforgettable, get ready to bite into a dish that brought every powwow to life with a little bit of crunch and a whole lot of heart. Which vintage ground beef recipe takes you back to your grandmother's kitchen? Share your memories in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another trip down memory lane.